Well, hi, Bracken Studios. Great to see you. Yeah, I know this channel looks like it's dead. I haven't uploaded in like a year. I sincerely regret that, but like I was saying at the beginning of this video, I was finishing up my degree, and not only that, I had a job to do at the same time. I still have a job, but now that I'm graduated, like I want to get back into this channel. In fact, I'm super stoked to get back into this channel because I've learned a lot since then, and I just think it'd be so much fun to make more videos. So I'm going to be doing that. But so can you clarify, man, what you meant by the connection between Apeiron and quantum physics? Let's see. What do you say? Love learning about Anaximander's Apeiron. Super cool and sounds like modern quantum mechanics. I'm not exactly sure if I know the connection there, but if you can clue me in, that'd be great. Love to hear about it. There's actually a really good philosophy channel on, and I've been watching it for several years, and it talks about quantum mechanics quite a lot. So it's called Inspiring Philosophy, and I think that Inspiring Philosophy is probably the best philosophy channel on YouTube that I've ever seen. Now, I don't give unremittent praise to anybody. Inspiring Philosophy is slightly neckbeardish. I don't know how to put it any other way than that. He's just a little bit pretentious. He's just a little bit pretentious, and sometimes his content can rub you the wrong way. But in truth, he really does his research, and he just makes the most fascinating videos. So if you're interested in the connection between, you know, yeah, what Bracken Studios just said, can't stick around too long, procrastinating a bit, but it's basically the bedrock of reality, almost like the Matrix. Yes, inspiring philosophy. Great. Well, glad you enjoy Inspiring Philosophy too, Bracken Studios. I'm going to tell you the truth. And by the way, thank you for being a loyal subscriber. It just thrills me that people actually watch this channel all this time later and actually care about the content it produces. I promise I'm going to release a video. I promise. Let me just say this, though, really quickly. The one exception I take to inspiring philosophy is this idea of quantum mechanics as the bedrock of reality. I have found myself a little bit uncomfortable with this, and this comes after this comes after reading David Bohm. So David Bohm was another theoretical physicist in the 20th century who really thought that quantum mechanics had taken a bad turn. And now I'm not a physicist. I'm a philosophy guy, not a physicist. But David Bohm, I found him convincing. So he was a proponent of an alternative model of quantum mechanics called Bohmian mechanics. Inspiring Philosophy has actually made a video on Bohmian mechanics because it received wide media attention. It became very popular, and he felt the need to debunk it. I found his debunking interesting, but not entirely convincing, because at the end of the day, quantum mechanics is actually based on certain assumptions about the best way to interpret empirical data. So when we say that quantum mechanics is the bedrock of reality, I don't really know if that's true. Like, especially because, let's see, Bracken says, I think it's more like the shadows of Plato's cave and we're the watchers. So what you're doing there is you're affirming a Platonic metaphysics. You're saying, I guess you think, yeah, it is a new field of study. So we do have to, we have to suspend judgment, right? We can't sit there and come up with conclusions. But well, I guess my point is this, Bracken. My point is this: whether quantum mechanics turns out to be true or not, it doesn't actually solve the metaphysical question about, for instance, the apeiron or whatnot. Apeiron is actually a little bit beyond is a little bit beyond quantum mechanics, in my opinion. Apeiron talks about the origins of physical reality in general. So quantum mechanics is still a physical system. So, for instance, it requires at minimum a quantum vacuum to operate. So, for instance, Anaximander would still be interested in where the mathematics governing quantum mechanics came from. He'd still be interested in it's sort of the so there's an equation. It's Schrodinger's uncertainty function, right? Um, and it involves several weird symbols, but a lot of it is numbers too. He, like Plato, would be interested in the metaphysical basis of these numbers. What gives these numbers meaning? Well, quantum mechanics can't really answer that, not from inside the system, um, because the system itself depends, or presupposes the existence of these fundamental or primitive concepts. So I wouldn't say that quantum mechanics is the equivalent of Platonic forms. And let me know if that makes sense to you, or you might be gone because I just got a new. Let's see. Rocket Think says, did you know that there is a philosophical razor called Newton's Flaming Laser Sword? Do you know what? I actually didn't know that, Rocket Think. Newton's Flaming Laser Sword. Would you like to elaborate on that? Because I've never heard of that before. I have to say, admit, I thought you were going for Occam's razor there. Newton's Flaming Laser Sword. Yeah, no idea what that is. Please do tell me. Bracken says, good point. That's probably where inspiring philosophy goes into logical arguments in order to get a being that we would call God. Yeah, Bracken, definitely inspiring philosophy is a theist. I haven't, I try to make my videos accessible to non-theists. I really do want to advance philosophical, you know, just literacy for people, whether without respect to whether they're theist or not. But I am myself a theist. So I have found many of inspiring philosophy videos to be really edifying in the past. I just wish, he wouldn't depend so much on scientific research to make his points. Because then I find that anytime the empirical evidence is threatened, he kind of goes into a panic. And to me, that's always a bad sign for an apologist. If empirical evidence is enough to bother you, then your arguments are probably not sophisticated enough to make a strong theist point. Not to say I don't think that he does excellent work. I do think he does. But I just wish that he'd have a slightly less empirical bent in his work. That's just me. It probably helps a lot of people. I especially like what he's done on split brain patients and conscious and non-local consciousness. I actually talked about that a lot in my philosophy of mind classes. Someone needs to talk about that stuff. He does a great job. Um, he definitely raises a lot of really interesting points and directed me to research that I'd never heard about before personally. And it fascinated my professor as well as the students in the class. So appreciate inspiring philosophy. Wish that he was a little less dependent on theoretical physics. Let's see. But it is cool physicists and theists seem to be coming to a simulation outlook like Elon Musk and possibly Kaku. Do you know, Bracken, this whole simulation thing, I find it very interesting, but at the same time, things I want to say about that. Not classical theism, definitely not Platonism. Even though the realm of the ideas is sort of realer, right, than the realm of the forms is realer than the realm of phenomenological reality. They're both separate things, which is why they end up appearing to be different. And that's kind of Plato's, if you might say that it's his apotheosis, his explanation for evil. That's important for Aristotle and Aquinas as well. So the fact that there's this one realer reality and then there's this less real reality to explain the distinction between evil and good, truth and false. But I find, and now I'm getting to my second point, I find this whole idea of simulation, I do find it very interesting, but I really think it's extremely similar. In fact, I'm not sure if it can be distinguished from Berkeleyan idealism. The idea that reality just is phenomenological reality. So, physical matter just is ideas. It just is the kind of thing that we can perceive through the senses. That the whole distinction that was taken for granted by, say, Hume and Kant between physical reality and perceptual reality is just not there. It's just not there. I really kind of think that this whole, Elon Musk, who's not, I admire Elon Musk as an entrepreneur, less so as a philosophical thinker, but his whole idea that reality is a simulation, I find to be really sort of tantalizingly similar to idealism. And I'm not sure, I think maybe someone should do a project to sort of determine just how similar these views of reality are. But my own personal opinion is that if the evidence does weigh in favor of reality being a simulation, idealism would be a really great route to explore. But then I would personally be concerned, and I would want to hear people weigh in on sort of what would we do about the apotheosis in that case? What would we do to explain the existence of evil in a reality that is fundamentally intelligible on its surface? It's not masking anything, right? It's not less than something higher than itself, like it is in Plato's metaphysics, or even to some degree in Aristotle's metaphysics. I would be interested in apotheosis. And if there were no apotheosis, then obviously, for thinkers like Elon Musk, God wouldn't enter the picture in the first place. There would be no need for apotheosis, which might be satisfying for them. But for a lot of people, it's not going to be satisfying. So I'd just like to hear, if anyone has a perspective on that, if anyone's done any work on that. It'd be very interesting to learn about. See this, Bracken again, interested in philosophic mythic theist outlook. There's a great channel called Pixels and Papyrus. He debunks the Creation Museum with scripture and points out biblical metaphors of gods. Okay, so I don't know if he wrote more than this, Bracken. It's cutting out at gods. Biblical metaphors of gods. I'm going to assume you said something like existence or personhood or no? Okay, I'm going to wait for you to just fill me in on what you wanted to say there, Bracken, because it just cut you off, I'm afraid. It ended at gods. But I have been to the Creation Museum, actually twice, once more than I really wanted to. Like God slays a hydra. Points out biblical metaphors of gods, like God slays a hydra. Well, of course, to my knowledge, there is no biblical God slaying a hydra. I'm not a biblical expert. I don't think that there is a God slaying hydra, but I'm going to assume that you meant metaphor in general, rather than trying to say that there is no hydra. You probably meant something along the line of God creating the universe in 6 days, right? Like you'd say that's a metaphor due to the sort of textual analysis of ancient Near Middle Eastern literature. So I've actually been to the Creation Museum, again, like I said, once more than I actually wanted to. And when I first went there, my family was very evangelical. I'm not evangelical anymore. My family was. So they took me there when I was about 5 or 6 years old. And the funnest thing was we had those Razor flip phones, and I took some videos of my Razor flip phones. I thought it was the coolest thing ever at the time. Then I went to some museums in Chicago. I went to some museums in Washington, D.C. And and when I came back as like a 16-year-old, I realized, oh gosh, this museum is like really subpar. And it sort of made me sad. I just felt sad that, so let's see this. The Leviathan mentioned in Psalms has multiple heads, so there's a lot of subtext on modern features overlooked. I see. You know what? Interesting. So I would presume that the channel you're talking about, Pixels and Papyrus, draws a lot on textual criticism of the Old Testament, sort of situating it in the context of Persian literature, things like that. I think that's a great thing to do because I think it's undoubtable. I think it's undoubtable that the Old Testament has influences from big powers in the region like the Persians and the Egyptians. But the specific example you gave sets some red flags up in me. Let's see. Hold on. Bracken, because I'm pretty sure that the Leviathan is not mentioned in Psalms. I'm pretty sure it's mentioned in the book of Job. And I'm also pretty sure that the Hydra it would be an anachronism for to be an influence on Leviathan, because the Hydra is actually from Greek philosophy, from not philosophy, Greek myth, and the book of Job predates Greek mythology by several hundred years. If I'm recalling that correctly, I'm not going to say I know that for a fact, but I'm pretty sure of that. So as far as that specific example goes, I would push against that specific example. I find that a bit dubious, just given my familiarity with Greek myth and sort of the timeline of the Old Testament. However, there is a big movement today to talk. Okay, Bracken says one more thing. Also about Creation Museum, he uses scripture and grammar to show animal death was in the Garden of Eden. Interesting, Bracken. Interesting. I have. Well, let me go back to my original point first, real quick. So about the whole Hydra thing, I don't. I think that the connection between the Hydra and Leviathan is tenuous because Hydra comes after Leviathan. Leviathan is in the book of Job. Job is older than Greek mythology. But at the same time, a lot of people have proposed connections between Persian literature and Old Testament literature. I think that's very plausible. And I think that people who are serious readers of the Old Testament need to take that into account. I don't personally come in like, I don't weigh in very hard on what the correct interpretation of the Old Testament is. I was raised on a pretty healthy diet of Ken Ham and people like him, which is pretty funny because nowadays I've come so far from them. But the truth is, like, I've been so open minded since my youth to sort of a more metaphorical interpretation of Genesis. And the works that I've read to that effect, like Genesis 1, there's this book. I think it's just called Genesis 1. It's very famous for sort of spelling out the allegorical reading of Genesis. I just find a little unconvincing. I don't find them very convincing personally. But that's not a hill that I personally die on. Um, but my guess is that the writer, at least the writer of Genesis, did not intend an allegorical interpretation. Nevertheless, we certainly have later church authors like Augustine, for instance, who proposed allegorical interpretations of Genesis. But just to my mind, when I read it, I really feel like it is in the mythological, what's the word? It is in the mythological genre, and to the people who are reading it, it is intended to be literal. And I know that people say, well, literal is a modern idea. Like people in the ancient days didn't read literally. No, sort of. Literal is kind of a modern idea, but the ancient writers at least knew what literal was to the degree that they could distinguish between a literal interpretation and an allegorical interpretation. They didn't use those words, but they would talk about communicating in pictures, and then they would talk about communicating in fact. So they knew what literal meant. And for my part, personally, when I read, it just begs credibility for me to read Genesis and think the author of Genesis didn't mean for it to be read literally. But I'm certainly open to any arguments because I do know that some people know about this more than I do. So let's see. It doesn't say Hydra, it just says heads. Sorry to stick on the topic, but I recommend the video Why Leviathan Isn't a Dinosaur by Pixels and Papyrus. Well, thank you for the recommendation, Bracken. I'd certainly be interested in listening to it. I'm not personally convinced that Leviathan was a dinosaur, so not necessarily something I need to be convinced of. Let's see, you say, Bracken says, but it's certainly refreshing to not be stuck in such a literal view, whatever that means. Well, I think that the whole gamut of possible views that the text would permit us to adopt, are ones that we should be open to exploring, and we should educate ourselves about. We should educate ourselves as much about them as possible. So I appreciate your recommendations, and when I have time in the near future, I'll be sure to check them out because I have. It's been years. Let me tell you, it's been years since I've seen someone on YouTube talk about those Old Testament Genesis kind of dinosaur type things. Like Thunderfoot's about the only person on YouTube who still talks about this anymore, and he's kind of washed up. Sadly, does his subscriber base has dropped significantly, and most people have moved on from it. So the golden era of biblical creationism has kind of faded, in my opinion. but always fun to return to old topics. So definitely, I'd be interested in a refresher. I read the Answers in Genesis magazine while I was growing up. I found it, sometimes infuriating and sometimes very interesting. Great point, also Solar Freaking Roadways. Great video. Great video. Not very philosophical, but Thunderfoot serves his role as a technology critic. That's what he's best at, I think, and he has done a fantastic job, sort of shooting down overly ambitious, underfunded, underplanned technological projects. Solar Freaking Roadways was very entertaining when I saw it. It remains entertaining today. I've probably seen it 2 times. So I really commend him for that. Really commend him for that. It's good to know that there are some bright minds who are willing to shoot down BS when they see it, because there is so much BS, not only in the technological world, but in media in general. So when somebody has the expertise to knock it out of the park, that's always very encouraging. So yeah, thank you for weighing in, Bracken. I appreciate it. It's funny because interested in futurism, I recommend Isaac Arthur. Are Bracken, is Isaac Arthur a author or is Isaac Arthur a YouTuber? Can't say I'm too interested in futurism, the fictional genre. Technology has always been an active interest of mine. I started off by studying engineering at UTK before I switched to philosophy. I wrote for a technological firm in Singapore for several years in high school. So technology is always interesting to me. Futurism, as I understand it, is a fictitious genre. Not my favorite to read personally. But if you can clarify whether that's an author or a channel, that would be appreciated. Interesting, anyways, about that whole going back, because I'm kind of, let's see, someone else has commented. Guacman, how do I deal with depression? Hi, Guacman, are you for real? Or so I just don't mean to be insensitive, but are you for real? If you could just comment and say, yes, I'm for real, I'd be happy to answer that question from my own perspective. But I've noticed that when one does these live streams, one often has trolls to deal with. Cool. So how do I deal with depression? Guacman, that's a very broad question. I mean, it really depends on what kind of depression you're going through. As far as the psychological aspect of that goes, I'm led to understand that people often confuse depression with anxiety, and they're actually different things, and they have to be managed in different ways. So if you could elaborate a little bit on what kind of depression you're going through, I'd be happy to weigh in there. But I've definitely dealt with depression in my own life in 2 different ways. I dealt with the loss of a friend, and it was actually around the beginning of my college career, and my best friend ever passed away right at the beginning of my college career, and it was very, very difficult for me to continue after that. I sort of dealt with some suicidal urges after that. It's the most dark place I've ever been in my life. And I got through that through a combination of factors I'm happy to elaborate on. But I cannot downplay sort of the role that my relationship with just the people around me in my life, but also my relationship with a higher power, sort of my intrinsic faith in something beyond the universe, which could make sense of my suffering and the suffering of people around me, had to do with that. So that would be 2 things. One, my relationship with other people. Second, my relationship with a higher power. But third, and this is something I don't want to underemphasize either, was my activity, being active, because I found that possibly the most exacerbating factor to my depression. And there's nothing you can do in the first 2 weeks after something really devastating happens to you. After something really traumatic happens to you, there's nothing you can do. You're going to be depressed, and there's really no way you can get away from it. You shouldn't run from it. You should cry. You should go out in the woods alone, stare at the stars, whatever you have to do, like whatever. But as time goes on, as time progresses, there are situations you can find yourself in that will only exacerbate your depression. For me, that was being alone, and that was just being secluding myself and isolating myself from other people. Uh, it was even when I was in public, just avoiding other people, not even making eye contact with them, that sort of thing. And it was definitely not getting work done. It was sleeping, just because sleeping was like better than being awake. At least when I was asleep, I wasn't conscious and I could at least dream. I got a job. I got a crazy job, and I decided whatever job I get, and I prayed that. I prayed when I was trying to apply for a job. I said, God, whatever job you give me, I'll take it. Just whatever job. I got a door knocking job. It's the craziest thing I've ever done, because anyone who knows me knows I'm an extreme introvert, and it stressed me the hell out to be knocking on people's doors. And it was summer, of course, too, and I was just burning up. But doing it brought me out of my shell, and at the end of the day, I found I was so much more happy. I was so much more happy than when I was sitting inside alone and not talking to anybody. Even talking to strangers, even being yelled at by strangers, was better than being alone. So, as far as philosophy, because you asked this question about depression, you asked it on Philosophy Channel, so I'm assuming that you might be interested in sort of like the philosophy of depression. Do you know? So there's this book I read when I was depressed, and it was my introduction to Kierkegaard. It's called Fear and Trembling. So the reason I waited to talk about the philosophical literature on depression is because personally I've had a mixed relationship. I've had a mixed relationship with the existentialists when it came to depression. When I read Fear and Trembling for the first time, I felt like it was a real revelation for me, because Kierkegaard was talking about the importance of paradox in a human being's life. So, for instance, for Kierkegaard, his depression, if that's what he was going through, and it's very hard to know because Kierkegaard is a very elusive historical figure, and we don't know a whole lot about him, except through his letters and what people wrote about him. There are a lot of details about his life that remain sort of shadowy to us. Most of his depression fell out from this bad relationship that he had with the girl that he was dating. And for some reason, this was so important to Kierkegaard. This was so important to him. He couldn't get over it throughout his entire career. And he wrote this whole book called Fear and Trembling, which was basically centered around the biblical story of Isaac and Jacob. And the kind of fear that we cannot comprehend that Abraham had to go through to sacrifice his son Isaac on the mountain. And he compared this to the kind of fear that we have to go through in our lives when we have to simultaneously hold two seemingly contradictory beliefs. And I think that to an extent that's very profound, because I have to hold contradictory beliefs in my life, and you probably do too. I have to believe that my life is going to be meaningful, even though it's manifestly obvious that I'm going to die, and at the end of the universe, the universe will be nothing. It will reduce to a pile of it's essentially a homogeneous field of atoms that have no energy or temperature. I have to believe that tomorrow will be okay, even if it feels like I'm going to lose my job or something because I haven't been keeping up with it. I'm not saying this because this is really true. I'm just giving hypothetical examples. But we have to live as if those things are true. So, anyways, Kierkegaard sort of analyzed the frame of mind that Abraham had to go through to sacrifice Isaac, and he talked about the necessity of a leap of faith to live life. And personally, I did find Kierkegaard's work healing to an extent. I don't know if it would be healing to you. Rocket, let me think. Who asked this question? Guacman asked that question. I don't know if that'll be helpful to you, Guacman, but if you do need help, I'd suggest reading Fear and Trembling by Kierkegaard, and I definitely recommend, if you're in deep depression, call Suicide Hotline, because I don't know how bad you are, but I do take this sort of thing seriously, so I don't want to leave you off the hook. So let me know if you have any more questions about that. Thanks for asking. Rocket Think says, everything is made out of atoms and quarks. So things like spirits can't possibly be real, because you're absolutely welcome, Guacman. Again, thank you for commenting. So things like spirits can't possibly be real because they're not a physical thing. So would it be the same thing for God? Well, Rocket Think, so what you've just propounded to me is physicalism, as a naive physicalism. Everything is made of atoms and quarks. What about that statement, Rocket Man? What is that statement made out of? What about the content of that statement? What about the truth value of that statement? Is that made of atoms and quarks? Because if it is, you can't really trust your own thoughts, can you? They're just atoms and quarks bouncing around your head. Do you have any basis on which to believe the validity of what you're actually saying? Because I'm not sure if you do, if it's all just atoms and quarks. So this was the school of thought that was very prevalent in the early 20th century. It began with thinkers like Bertrand Russell. They were called the logical positivists. The other one was what was that linguist? Who was that big language philosopher? Principia Mathematica was Bertrand Russell, and then the Tracticus Philosophicus was. Does anyone know who wrote Tracticus Philosophicus? Because I forgot. Okay, that guy. They were all logical positivists, and logical positivism was the view that if you can't feel it, you can't touch it, you can't see it, it's not real. It's unintelligible. Not only isn't it real, it's unintelligible. So for me to say something like God is fundamentally just ridiculous, because you can't smell God, you can't touch God, you can't feel God. God does not pertain to your senses. You do not know what God is like. So when I say I have a relationship with God, I'm saying something fundamentally nonsensical, according to the logical positivists. Well, this school of thought was, again, like I said, it was popular right up until the 1950s. Why did it collapse? Because someone pointed out that the statement, nothing that isn't physical is intelligible, is itself non-empirical. That statement isn't empirical. The truth content of that statement isn't empirical. That statement is internal. It's intuitive. It's a logical rule that's sort of, to be crass, although I don't like to be crass, it's sort of pulled out of one's butt. One makes it up, but one certainly does not come to that conclusion through physical evidence. So I'd say, Rocket Man, I would simply doubt that everyone really agrees. Everything is made up of quarks and atoms. Certainly, philosophers in mind are not sure about that. Qualia, it still remains an unexplained aspect of human experience, and there's a lot of open-ended questions about where it comes from, what a human being is made of. In ethics, there's a big question about what the summum bonum is, the greatest good, what the highest standard of good is, whether it can be physical, whether it's intelligible for it to be a physical thing. Metaphysics, of course, there's a huge debate in metaphysics about whether, quarks and sort of these physical particles that science talk about are really the most fundamental things, but there's not widespread agreement. So I guess what I'd say is, if you're correct that everything is made up of quarks and atoms, things like spirits can't possibly be real. I guess that'd be true if spirits can't be made up of quarks of atoms, and I guess the same would be true of God, but the premise itself is quite dubious. Nobody's really prepared to concede that as a matter of fact, although a lot of philosophers do think so. Even they would be hesitant to say, there is nothing outside of physical reality. Even they would be reasonably hesitant to say so. And certainly my professors were, even though most of them were of a materialist bent. Most of them were agnostic or atheistic. So hopefully that answers your question, Rocket Man. Let me know if you have anything more to say about that. Kind of this weird thing, when my phone goes low on battery, the messages become weird. I get worried that I'm missing something. So I'm going to plug it in and just make sure that I'm not missing any comments. So they seem to disappear. Let's see. No, it doesn't look like I did. I think I got the last one. Oh, there'd have to be a first. Okay, let's see. Yeah. Elaborated. There'd have to be a first cause. Otherwise, what caused that? Also, concepts like angels, messengers of God, might be material, so they can interact with the substance God's not a part of. Yeah, Bracken. I don't. Personally, for me, I don't want to get in too much into sort of like speculation about. It's not the aim of this channel, like to speculate about the substance of extra human spirits and that sort of thing. I've been open about the fact that I myself am a Christian. I myself am a theist. I do believe in the existence of angels and spirits, things like that. But that's a conversation that one would want to have with a theologian. Like, what is a spirit composed of? Is it atoms, or is it some, metaphysical substance? I don't know, and I'm not. I don't personally want to weigh in on that. But I would agree with what you said to Rocket Man about the need for a first cause. I think remains a very compelling objection to physical reality. Yeah. Good. Yeah, you said I know. Just responding to physical is uncommon. Yeah, cool. Yeah, I agree with you on what you said about that. Um, the telos, the telos of the universe is important, and that's something that tends to be neglected in all physicalist, ontological accounts of how the universe came to be. The whole Lawrence Krauss deal, where it's like, how do you get a universe from nothing? And Lawrence Krauss says, well, the quantum vacuum. You know, we have these equations to describe the way that a quantum vacuum works, and every philosopher looks at him and goes, "What?" Because like they know that a quantum vacuum is not nothing. It's not no, it's something. So like, where the heck did the quantum vacuum come from? Lawrence Krauss can't explain it. Most physicists can't explain things like that because that's not what they're interested in. That's not their that's not their line of work. That's not what they're paid to do. That is what philosophers are paid to do. So, um, you know, personally, I kind of agree with C.S. Lewis when I think about this whole train of thinking about like, is the universe physical or is there something beyond the physical? I kind of agree with C.S. Lewis when he says to to realize that the world was purely physical for us as physical beings would be like a fish realizing that it was in water. If a fish, never exited water, if there was nothing but water, a fish would never know that it was wet. If uh, if we were really purely physical, and there was no such thing as anything beyond the physical realm, I sort of think we'd have no idea. Like we'd have no concept of extra physicality or metaphysicality. Those would just be unintelligible concepts to us. They would never occur to us in the first place. Um, and for that reason, I don't, a computer algorithm called Solver 8 has actually proven Anselm's version of the ontological argument to be sound, meaning that if the premises are true, the conclusion follows. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's true, but it's logically valid. But that's why I sympathize with Anselm's ontological argument, because I just think it's intuitive. I think that if there were no such thing as a God, or there were no such thing as a heaven, or there were no such thing as you know, any realm beyond the physical realm, we'd have no idea that there was no such thing in the first place. So that's my personal persuasion on the subject. So let's see. Bracken says, it doesn't help most philosophical political debates take place with different ontological positions / biases recount a universe of darkness. Darkness have no meaning. Yeah, Bracken. Yeah, that's true. Absolutely true. When people argue about God or when people argue about morals, generally speaking, people just don't get to the fundamental question at all. People don't realize that they're talking about philosophy in the first place. They sort of think, and I do blame, contemporary academia partly. I do blame postmodernism partly. I don't want to be like you know, a Jordan Peterson shill, even though I like Jordan Peterson. I don't want to just like completely jump on postmodernism. I do think that postmodernism has something to do with people's inability to really dialogue intelligibly about moral questions or metaphysical questions, like whether God exists. People just talk about their opinions or their feelings, or they sort of draw on pre-existing values that they assume are shared with the interlocutor, without ever really getting to the deeper questions. So philosophical education would really help people. CJ Collingwood asked, did you major in philosophy? Yes, CJ, I did. I just graduated this year. Hoping to go on to a master's at some point. Although I get the feeling that it wouldn't be the most productive use of my time, because I found that being an autodidactic prior to entering philosophy in college sort of equipped me for most of my assignments adequately well. Um, I didn't learn a ton. I learned some from my education in college. But I felt that if I'd spent the same amount of time that I spent studying at university, just studying on my own, I probably would have learned even more than I did at college. So I may go on to get a master's just for the heck of it, or I may just continue to study on my own because I enjoy the subject. So yes, I do have a bachelor's, and it was hard fought for simply due to some details that I relayed earlier to other people in the chat, which made college a bit difficult the first 2 years to get by. But why philosophy? Um, well, CJ, that is a philosophical question, isn't it? You ask someone why they did something. You're asking about what matters to them. You're asking about their value structure. You're asking about their views on the world. The sort of answer that you expect for me to give is the sort of answer that you expect for me to reveal to you what distinguishes me from you. For instance, you may not be exactly sure why someone would want to get a major in philosophy, but you know that something compels them to do so. So, in a weird way, in a roundabout way, that is why I took philosophy because I want to be able to answer questions like that one. I'm interested in why people do things. I'm interested in why people think what they think. I'm interested in whether there's a way to sort of cut past a lot of the arguments that I have with my friends and my family, and sort of the people that I have around me. But sort of my own history goes way back when I was in middle school. I was raised. This is something you're never going to hear on the Philosophy Monkeys channel. I'm never going to say this. This is something I only say in a live chat. I was born and raised in a very small sort of cult-like fundamental independent Baptist church, and I was a little kid. I was on the internet, and I was very precocious and I was very talkative, and I wanted to sort of share my Baptisty views with people. So I found this is probably back 2006, 2007. I found a board of like atheists and non-believers and tried to share my baptism with them, and they just mowed me over. They mowed me to the ground. They were citing documents to me. They were citing, Sam Harris. They were citing, oh, who's that other lovely chap? The British guy, Christopher Hitchens. Well, I love now, but back then I was just absolutely intimidated. They mowed me over, but I wasn't going to give up. Like I had to keep arguing for God's existence. I had to keep arguing for like objective morality. The other thing that I was obsessed with, and this has remained an obsession with me throughout my life, is aesthetics because I played trumpet throughout from the time I was a kid through high school, and my sister majored in music and teaches music now. I was always interested in the idea of aesthetics, like what makes the difference between music and non-music. Just a train blowing in the distance. Is that music? People just like whispering in a room. Is that music? Like, what's the difference between that and music? I was super interested in that question. And again, like those questions that I was growing up with, God's existence and morality and that kind of thing. So I kept at it. I read a lot of books. It was a very formative experience for me as a kid. I took a hiatus of about 2 years where I sort of got off the internet and stopped talking to people. But then I just read a lot of books and I went to a lot of conferences. And then I got back on and realized, you know what? I found some answers. I didn't find all the answers, but I found some answers. And that's when I realized, I really cared about philosophy and I wanted to think about philosophy more. And I thought that, it could enrich people's lives to sort of think about these things in more detail and spend more time on them. So, that's about the best off the cuff answer that I can give you to the question of why I studied philosophy, CJ. Thanks for the question. It's an interesting question. Originally I actually chose engineering. I just chose engineering because it would make me money, and it would have, but I found that it just crushed me. It not in the sense that I couldn't do it. I could do it. I just found myself every day asking, why am I doing this? Why am I doing this? And I look around me and all the students, especially at UT, and I don't know if it's this way at other colleges, but the standards are so low. The standards were so low. People were cheating in front of their TAs. And I was just putting together these circuits, and I was putting together these diagrams, in CAD software. And I was just asking myself, what is the point? Why am I doing this? Like, it wasn't making me happy. I didn't feel like it addressed anything that was important to me in life. And so I finally just got to a point where I decided, you know what? I'm going to go do something I actually care about, and that's philosophy. So that's what I did. That and a minor in English. So that minor in English is what actually pays my bills because I write on the side. That is how I actually make my money. The philosophy is not a field you want to go into if you want to get rich. You have to have something to pay the bills on the side. I met an author in Knoxville once who told me, "Books feed the soul," and she said that in a very inspiring way. And then she said, "But you have to feed yourself too." It was really funny the way she said it. It was just to imply, like, yeah, art's great, but you gotta eat. You can't just like an idealistic little kid jump into sort of an artistic or humanitarian field, without considering the practical ramifications. So, let's see, Bracken, loves talking with you, PM Philosophy Monkeys. But I've got to get back to my own homework anyway. We seem to have a lot of common as far as personal study and likes. Looking forward to more vids/live streams. Thank you very much, Bracken. I appreciate your participation. I wasn't sure if this would be any fun at all, but I've had a few people come on, and I feel like we've had a productive conversation. So yeah, I'll probably do more of these in the future. So good luck on your homework, Bracken, and thanks for dropping by. Appreciate it. And for those who are still hanging out here, I'm going to be making more of my regular videos. The 5-minute animation clips. And if you have subscribed to my channel, you're probably wondering, why did I go a year without uploading a new one? The truth is, honest to God, they just take a while to make. And it's not just, honestly, if it weren't for the script, if it were just the script, it wouldn't take so long. The script takes maybe a day to write. It's not that hard, but it's the animation. The animation, it takes forever. Even the really simplistic stuff that I do. Maybe it's the laptop I have, or maybe it's my own competence, but I just find that working with video editing software takes forever. And I just dread doing it. And so, like, for a year, I've been, studying and getting work done. I just did not have the time to, pour into creating new videos. And I really just wish there was a way to make, make videos look good without putting that much work into it, the kind of work that I had to put in before. Because otherwise, it'd be easy. I would just write a script and I would narrate the script and it'd be great. The other thing I do is I make music for the videos. That's not so bad. I enjoy doing that. But it takes time too. The next video that I do, you guys get a flash preview, I guess, since you're here. I'm going to be making one on Pythagoras, and I actually have a really, really, really cool setup for Pythagoras. It's going to be the best video that I've made to date, so I'm working on that right now. So you can expect that in the near future. Anyways, well, with Bracken gone, I haven't been receiving many questions since then. And don't personally have a whole lot to just say to the peanut gallery. So, if anyone wants to ask anything, go ahead, now's your chance. Not sure why you'd want to ask me something, but if you do, since there's actually people here, you are free to ask it. I will answer. Otherwise, I'll just ramble for probably another 5 minutes, and then I'll probably shower and just go to sleep. So, what I wanted to talk about before, Bracken went on to other things. I wanted to talk about this whole answers in Genesis thing because it actually deals with scientific epistemology. Scientific epistemology is not my main area of interest, but it is very interesting, and it really kind of plays in a lot to the way that people dialogue about sort of creationism in biblical text. Okay, but before I get onto that, CJ asked a question. Most influential philosopher, who do you take away from more than anyone else? Do you know, CJ, I have a really boring answer for you, and I always hate when people, no, I appreciate the question, but when people ask me this question, I always have to give a very boring answer because the truth is Plato, more than anybody else. And when you say Plato, people are like, oh, come on, like Plato is such an obvious answer. But no, the truth is Plato is more than any other, and I've read a lot of philosophers, but more than any philosopher I read, Plato really sort of set the groundwork, not only for a lot of the ideas that I had, because I disagree with Plato on a lot of things, but it was the way that he framed those ideas that really influenced me. It was the way that he framed the questions that got my mind turning the same way that it got the ancient Athenians turning. Yeah, the allegory of the cave, I don't think anyone reads the allegory of the cave without coming away a changed person. Personally, for me, that wasn't the most important thing about Plato's philosophy. For me, the most important and interesting aspect of Plato's philosophy, because I learned about the allegory of the cave when I was a kid. I did love it. It did influence me, don't get me wrong, but the thing that influenced me most was the tripartite soul. And now that might seem silly, like people don't talk about the tripartite soul that much. But the tripartite soul actually just opened up my mind to psychology in general, to my own, and to the field of psychology. Because Plato has this ingenious explanation for why humans are contradictory creatures. What he does is he goes through a deductive argument to prove that a human cannot be one unified thing. It has to be, a human has to be at least composed of three parts, because we have, say, I do not want to drink more alcohol, but I want to, and I do it, even though I don't want to at the same time. It can't be the same person. It's got to be different faculties of the soul. Now, nowadays, we have science. We talk about neuroscience. We talk about different parts of the brains and that kind of stuff. That's fine. But, the way Plato talked about it just made it come alive. And it made me think about myself and other people in ways that I hadn't thought about before. And I still think about the tripartite soul a lot. So let's see. Joey Pickett says, I don't know science. Well, what do you don't know what science is, Joey? Or you don't know much about science? Like, could you elaborate on what you don't know? So I'm not myself a scientist, but perhaps I could help clue you in a bit if that's really what you want to know from a philosophy live streamer on a Friday night on YouTube. I'm happy to clue you in as much as I can on the subject of science. Oh, but hey, CJ, let me tell you one other thing, because you asked about my most influential philosopher. My channel is about ancient philosophy, so you'd expect that ancient philosophy is the field that I'm most interested in, and it is. But I actually really care a lot about modern philosophers too. And the modern philosopher I've read, I'd say two modern philosophers I've read that have influenced me an awful lot. One is Jean Baudrillard. Okay, Jean Baudrillard is considered to be pedantic and obscure, but when I first read Simulacra and Simulation, it blew me away. Absolutely blew me away. Blew my mind. I felt that Baudrillard was perhaps the most prescient author of the 28th century when I read him. More so even than, because people talk a lot about George Orwell, or they talk a lot about Aldous Huxley. But I don't think that Huxley or Orwell were nearly as prescient as Jean Baudrillard was. You asked Simulacrum. Yes, that's correct, Collingwood. Simulacrum. The title of Baudrillard's most famous work, he wrote a lot of works, but his most famous work was Simulacra, with an A at the end, because it's plural. And, oh, do you know what? It was actually Simulacra and Simulation. Simulacra, simulation. But simulacrum is the singular form of simulacra. Simulacra. That's why I said it that way. I didn't read it in the French. I need not say I can't speak French, but that's the language it was written in. It is quite ridiculous in some sense. Jean Baudrillard was intentionally ridiculous, but he was also making a very good point about our relationship as consumers of media to media, and the relationship between media and our ability to comprehend truth. And I think that probably is one of the most important topics for people to think about today. And people are beginning to think about it today. People are beginning to think about it more, with politics. It kind of annoys me, to be honest with you, because as politics has dominated, people's minds lately, they've started to think about things that people were already talking about a long time ago. And, Jean Baudrillard, like I said, he was prescient, but he noticed a lot of the things that have become relevant. For instance, after this recent election where people were talking about fake news, they were talking about, thought bubbles. This is a thing people have been talking about lately as thought bubbles. Uh, Echo chambers is another word that people use. Well, Baudrillard said it better than anybody else. Baudrillard said it better than anybody else. And if you want more detail, I can share that with you. But if you've ever watched The Matrix, The Matrix was in part inspired by John Baudrillard. So, um, fascinating man, very interesting thoughts, and his writing style was also quite delightful, even though he was deliberately obscurantist sometimes. Other philosopher was Hawking, William Ernest Hawking, from the early early 20th century. Hawking was actually uh, an American pragmatist, but he was not American. He was British. But he was a theist, which was unusual among pragmatists. Most pragmatists were not theists. So Hawking kind of gave me a sort of stepping stone, sort of slide, I suppose, into the idealism of C.I. Lewis. Uh, not idealism, pragmatism. So, C.I. Lewis, these other, big American pragmatists. And I have found since then that pragmatism is an underrated school of philosophy. I think that more people need to pay attention to pragmatism. And I think that a healthy dose of pragmatism would help to solve a lot of the debates that we're having nowadays. Much better, for instance, than analytical philosophy, which took a lot of the big debates that metaphysicians were having and ethicists were having, and sort of said, well, they're all nonsensical because of language. They're all nonsensical. Well, the pragmatists didn't take that approach. The pragmatists didn't say they were nonsensical. They just said, unless they have practical application, then they're meaningless, because they took as one of their sort of unprovable axioms, unprovable but obvious axioms, that anything that is true must pertain to human experience in some shape or form. And if it doesn't, then there's no use thinking about it. I do agree with them on that, actually. I think the pragmatists are absolutely correct about that. And so that kind of helps to resolve this idea of schmess. And you might not know what schmess is, but schmess is this thought experiment that's used to criticize modern philosophy. It's like, what if you had chess, but you replaced the queens with pawns? It's just like a hypothetical board game that could potentially exist. And what would be the best way to play it? Like, who cares? It's such an abstract and stupid question. It has no bearing on anybody's lives. Who cares what the best way to play schmess is? And it's leveled against certain, some philosophers nowadays are so focused on questions that just don't matter. William, it's the guy who talks about modal realism. David Lewis. David Lewis is often cited as an example of a schmess philosopher, someone who just talks nonstop about questions that don't have any meaning for everyday human life. And it's a stereotype of philosophers nowadays. There's some truth to it. So I think the pragmatists, the best thing about the pragmatists was that they brought truth back to its application to human experience without becoming, logical positivists, without becoming, unquestioned. What's the word I'm looking for here? Empiricists. So yeah, two best modern philosophers: William Ernest Hawking, Jean Baudrillard. Ancient philosopher, Plato, without question, Plato. I enjoyed Cicero too, and of course, Boethius will always have a special place in my heart. But Plato before all else. Anyways, I'm gonna get something to drink. I'm gonna keep the phone on. if anyone wants to ask any questions, you can. If nobody does, then I'll probably wrap things up. But yeah, if for some reason you want to know the opinions of the guy who runs Philosophy Monkeys on any question, this has been a lot more successful than I thought it would be, to be honest. About an hour. I've had a lot of great questions, and I really didn't expect that. But if anybody has anything more to ask, feel free to. I will answer to the best of my ability. Otherwise, I'll probably wrap up. I've got this weird thing where I've got to plug my phone in, or else I can't see what anyone is asking. So give me 1 second. If anyone has submitted a question, I will respond promptly. But first, I need to plug my phone in so that I can actually see what the questions are. Let's see. Okay. Hold on. Have you ever gotten into Eastern philosophy, by the way? Can we expect on, oh gosh, yes, CJ. Eastern philosophy has actually been one of my favorite topics of study. And I took, even though I didn't need to, I took Japanese through advanced in college. Against all odds, I passed it. I had no idea that I would. I took religions of Asia. I took Hinduism, Confucianism, Taoism. I have a copy of the Tao Te Ching in my closet. I love this stuff. I love it to death, and I would love to talk about it in a future video. I would especially love to talk about the possible influence of Vedic thought on pre-Socratic thought, because this is something that I didn't talk about. Philosophy Monkeys. I'm probably not going to touch on it because the whole goal of Philosophy Monkeys was to talk about the canon of Western philosophers. But the really interesting question is whether or not Western philosophers were influenced by Hindus. They probably were. That's the truth. They probably were. And the reason we think this, the reason that we're pretty sure of this, is because of the deep similarities between certain pre-Socratic concepts, between certain Platonic concepts, and certain ideas that came directly out of the Indus Valley civilization. Specifically, monism. Monism was the predominant idea of Indus Valley civilization. The idea that, it's cliche, but cliches exist for a reason. Everything is one, is monism. That's monism. But that was the view, that was the view of Thales. That was the view of Heraclitus. That was the view of, Anaximenes and Anaximander alike. And Plato, to an extent. Plato was certainly a little bit more focused on a diverse world picture than a unskeptical monist, but monism seems to have had a big effect, and it may have reached the pre-Socratic philosophers through trade routes with India. So that's a really interesting historical question, and the philosophical schools of thought behind that question are highly fascinating. Buddhism, especially Buddhism, is every bit as complicated, nuanced, fragmented, full of different schools of thought as Western philosophy is to boot. It's just a fascinating thing to read about, and one of the funnest classes I think I ever had was reading primary sources from, Japanese, Tibetan, and ancient Indian. It was a lot of fun. So I would love to make some videos on Eastern philosophy, but for anyone who wants that, for anyone who wants some knowledge of Eastern philosophy, History of Philosophy Without Any Gaps is a great podcast. I bet that anyone listening to me right now knows what that is, because you're not listening to this. You're not listening to me babble if you're not already, pretty dedicated to philosophy. So you would know what the History of Philosophy Without Gaps is. Great podcast. Look it up if you don't know what it is. There's about I think there's 200 to 300 episodes so far. They talk about Eastern philosophy. They talk about Muslim philosophy. I think they talk about Chinese philosophy. I may be wrong about that, but definitely worth looking into. So, if you'd like to be more informed about Eastern philosophy, very fun topic. Definitely recommend it. I think that my biggest interest, thoughts on Alan Watts. Hold on a second. 1 second, CJ. Lost something. Oh, yeah. Thoughts on Alan Watts? You know, I don't like him. I'll just be honest. I don't like him. Alan Watts is a little bit unsophisticated for my taste. I admire his enthusiasm. I definitely admire. He seems to have done good things for people. So as far as being a good influence goes, well, hello, Zhe Zhongqi. Hopefully, I pronounced that correctly. He says moo. Okay. Well, moo to you too. Moo to you as well. Anyways, okay, he's spamming, so I'm just gonna ignore him. Uh, anyways, Alan Watts, I respect the influence that he's had on people because I think that he's had a good influence on people, but I don't think that he's a very good academic resource. I think he's more of a preacher or an apologist, and some of the videos that I've seen, he sort of unquestioningly buys into certain. See, the funny thing is, for a lot of people who haven't studied Eastern philosophy has this kind of tantalizing allure to it. Like, there's this sort of enlightenment aspect to Eastern philosophy that they think they're missing something. The West is missing something that the East has. The Occidental is missing something that the Oriental has. There's this sort of deep underlying conviction of that. Well, there's some truth to that, but then there's some falseness to that as well. One of my favorite professors that I had at UT actually went to India, and I mean he was meditating with yogis. You know, he took this very seriously. He read their scriptures. He was able to read in Sanskrit. And at first he was actually going to convert to an Eastern religion, and he thought that these Eastern religions and these Eastern philosophies provided answers to a lot of questions that Western philosophers have been thinking about for such a long time. But then, as he got more and more into it, he started to realize that there's a real emptiness to it as well. A sort of a very familiar emptiness, the emptiness that we feel, I think, as Western philosophers, where we're sort of missing some of the bigger questions. Well, people in the East are missing some of the bigger questions as well. They don't have it all figured out. There's certainly a lot of there's certainly a lot of sort of contradictions, especially in Theravada thought, that just intellectual people just can't deal with it. Like the only way you can deal with it is just to pretend it's not there. And so, as far as Alan Watts goes, and as far as mystics in general go, that's sort of the attitude I take towards them. Like they're offering something to you uh, that sounds very spiritual and sounds like a balm in Gilead, so to speak, just because of how foreign it is and just because of how new it is. But it isn't necessarily better. It isn't necessarily better. That the mystery only goes so deep. And then once you reach the bottom, you realize there's not as much there as you thought there was. So yeah, those are my thoughts on Alan Watts. So if you get into studying, if you get into mythology at all, is that at all a part of philosophy? So, oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely, CJ. You can't understand philosophy. You don't understand it. If you don't, at least you need to understand some mythology to understand philosophy. I mean, the truth is, my last class, the hardest class that I took by far, because it was a graduate level course, meaning that master students would take it, but I was allowed to take it because my professor thought I could, and I needed to take. It's complicated. I'm not going to get into it. Anyway, I took it, and it was on the Stoics, and there were some concepts from the Iliad and the Odyssey and Homeric works that were absolutely vital to understanding what the Stoics had to say. Unfortunately, my own spotty familiarity with the Homeric works made it difficult for me to appreciate the point that the Stoics were always trying to make. So I actually kind of regret that I didn't have more familiarity with myth, but we definitely did talk about it quite a lot. I don't know of any ancient philosopher who doesn't rely on myth extensively to talk about philosophy. And arguably, when when modern philosophers talk about philosophy, we talk about science a lot, right? I don't go down this route. I don't personally go for this line of thinking, but there are some people who would say that science is a form of mythology. I don't go for that line of thinking. I'm just poor. I'm the messenger here, so don't shoot the messenger. Uh, but so I'll finish my thought before getting back to Bracken. I don't shoot the messenger, but a lot of people would say that science is a form of mythology. I don't go for that line of thinking, but it's obvious that modern philosophers rely on science a lot to make a point, and without some at least surface level familiarity with science and scientific literature today, there's a lot of philosophical literature you just couldn't understand. Peter Singer would just be impossible to read. Mm. Who's that? Who's that? That political philosopher, John. It's not John Knotts. It's not John Rolfes. You know who I'm talking about? The guy who talks about human rights a lot. I'm sorry, I sound so uneducated right now, but I'm so bad with names. Um, Utilitarians, basically, is what I'm talking about, and human rights theorists would be impossible to read without science. So yeah, similarly, ancient philosophers are impossible to understand without mythology. So I have some familiarity with mythology. I would like some more familiarity with mythology. I think that if you study philosophy at any reputable university, you're gonna learn something about mythology. If you don't distrust the curriculum, Bracken says, "Hi, Philosopher Monkey's not back. Just had a thought, and thankfully you're still on. I'm glad I'm still on then too." There's a channel called Dave Superpowers, where he's basically made Jungian's typology scientific. No more cold reading test results. He's also relating it to biological nature's gathering slash organizing and tribe slash self. Well, I would need some clarification for what you mean by that. Relating Jungian archetypes to biology. Um, what you said was Jungian typology to biological natures. As far as I can understand Jung, and I do like Jung, you know, it would be very hard to connect Jungian archetypes to biology. You know, Jung Jung's let's see, not archetypes, personality types. Oh, you're talking about Myers Briggs. Yeah, Myers Briggs, which is based on Jung, but not developed by Jung. Yeah, MBTI. Right. Yeah, I can imagine that's relatable to biology. Not I'm into MBTI. It's helped me to understand plenty of people in my life. I'm not sure if I personally benefit that much from knowing how it tied into biology. I rest assured that there's some biological basis for the you know recurrence of traits that are associated with various Myers-Briggs types, but personally, I don't feel that that knowledge would enrich me in any way. So it sounds very interesting, Bracken. So thank you for sharing it with me. Not sure personally if that's something that I need to know very much about, but it does sound like worthwhile work. So, like I said, thank you for sharing it. thank thank you for hopping back on to just share this interesting finding with me. I appreciate that. Mm. All right. Well, I love even numbers. I have an obsession for even numbers. I'm like Pythagoras in that sense. I have to wait for the timer to reach 1:30 before I get offline. So I am gonna wait till 1:30 to get offline, and I will just talk until then. Anyone who's still here can still ask questions until then. But I guess I will talk about something that came up earlier. Because who was it? I believe it was Bracken who brought up the Creation Museum, and he brought up creationism in general. Something that I've been very interested in, and this actually kind of plugs into what CJ was saying too about mythology. I've been very interested in mythology, and oh, hold on, Bracken says I just find it helpful understanding myself with people I don't relate to. Also, designing characters. Yes, Bracken, I agree. I absolutely agree, and I have to say that MBTI has enriched my life on a personal level. Not so much philosophically, but personally, it certainly has. I found that, contrary to what some people say, the Myers Briggs types are both predictive and applicable. I have a large family, and the Myers Briggs holds true for them all. It has held true for the friends that I've met outside of my family as well. So, my type, by the way, in case anyone is interested, is INTJ, although that might not surprise anybody. This kind of stuff is pretty much dominated by INTJs. Um, but anyways, that's an aside. Um, Going back to a thought that was raised by Bracken and CJ, reiterated it with this whole idea of mythology. Both of both of which are quite interesting to me. This creation science thing is all about the philosophy of science, and I think that's really the debate. The debate isn't about the interpretation of Genesis, and the debate isn't about science itself. The debate is about the philosophy of science, because people like Ken Ham actually draw quite extensively on philosophy of science literature. So, for instance, the non-falsifiability of evolution by common descent. Let me make the distinction, because there's a difference between evolution and evolution by common descent. Evolution by common descent is the idea that mankind evolved gradually over millions of years from lower species of animals. Evolution in general is simply the process by which it happened, and it can happen at any time. Evolution by common descent is considered to be non-falsifiable, because you can't prove that it did happen except inductively. Inductively, you can by pointing to this or that example, but there will always be deductive assumptions involved to make the evidence create a conclusive case. A conclusive case can never be made from historical evidence, and this all has to do with the way that we interpret evidence. This all has to do with the way that we interpret the world around us. And the ancients, there is actually good evidence to suggest that when the ancients saw dinosaur bones, they came up with their own mythologies. This was certainly true of the Roman era. They came up with their own mythologies to explain where these things came from, to explain the kind of creatures that they came from. And nowadays we have our own very elaborate, very sophisticated explanations of where these things came from, based on carbon dating, based on, all kinds of, scientific inquiry and research. But are they less mythological? Like, they're more well founded, yes, but are they less mythological? Because to the people in Rome and Greece, it made perfect sense to think dinosaur bones belonged to dragons or centaurs. That's what they looked like. That's exactly what they looked like. And to us, they look exactly like the remnants of beasts that lived 26 million years ago and went extinct in a meteorite strike. But is it any less mythological? I'm not saying that it is mythological, but I think it's an interesting question to ask whether it is any less mythological than the old views of what these empirical artifacts constituted. A guy named Michael Pierce ties philosophy and types together. Groups of types tend to hold societal ideas, axes and quadrants, and axis. Fair-minded versus goal-oriented. That I would be interested in, Bracken. Michael Pierce. I feel like I know that name. I'm not sure where I know it from. Um, it doesn't surprise me either. You can tell me if I'm right about this, Bracken. I would absolutely guess that ENFPs always buy into something mystical or something liberal. And I don't say that insultingly. I think that's true from my experience with ENFPs. INTJs, and I am something of an outlier where INTJs are concerned. Most INTJs are very empiricist. And most INTJs, in my experience, are very empiricist or are very, positivist oriented, or rationalist. One of the three. They kind of make a trinity of ideas. Empiricists, rationalists, and positivists all kind of get along. But you don't find many INTJ mysticists. You don't find many INTJ Aristotelians. You don't find many INTJ Platonists. Let's see. Bracken says, yeah, though he tends to relate them to wizards like Newton or Tesla. Wizards like Newton or Tesla. I object to calling Newton or Tesla wizards. Newton maybe. Tesla, eh. I think Tesla's a little overrated. Just to be frank, that is a non-philosophical opinion that I hold. Yeah. The INTJs certainly see themselves as wizards like Newton or Tesla. So if you, I don't know if anyone here is an INTJ. If either, I think there's just two of you now. I think it's just CJ and Bracken. If either of you INTJs? Because if you're not, INTJs are the most egotistical people you will ever meet. Just know that. Just know that. They're super egotistical. Don't buy into their BS. Okay, CJ has not taken an MBTI test. Okay. Probably not an INTJ. Just a guess. I don't think CJ's probably an INTJ. If you take an MBTI test, CJ, it'll probably take you about 30 minutes. I would be interested in your results. Personally, I find the test difficult. I have to do a self-assessment. I find the self-assessment to be quite easy, and I find it difficult to answer test questions because I'm always overthinking them. I'd be curious whether Bracken is an INTJ or not. You may or may not be. But INTJs are the most egotistical people you will ever meet. Don't buy into their BS. Don't let them boss you around. Don't let them bully you because they'll try to. Don't let them. And yeah, that applies to me, I guess. But it's unlikely that I'll ever, because I'm just a YouTuber, so I'm probably not going to be trying to bully you around. But in your own life, if you ever meet an INTJ, realize that they're probably going to try to boss you around. So don't let them do that. Michael influenced a quote, Newton was not the first of the age of reason, but the last of the magicians. Interesting. I like that quote. Yeah, I like that quote because, it's not well known that Newton was actually a mysticist. He was very mystical. Um, the idea is sort of like that Newton was sort of like a rationalist hero, right? Like Newton knew better than anybody else. Newton was this guy who looked to the stars and found patterns in the way that things fell and whatever. It's a myth. Newton was sitting in front of a mirror trying to pry his eye open to figure out how it worked. He was doing rituals. He wrote occultic texts. Newton was an occultist. He was the last of the magical thinkers. I think that's a great, very poetic way to say what Newton was, because what Newton ended up ushering in was not something that he would have wished to usher in. He did not wish to usher in the age of reason as we understand it now. He was himself very mystical, and his predecessors sort of erased that from his personality. But of course, that is also because we are indebted to Newton for his scientific discoveries. CJ asks, are you as interested in science as you are in philosophy? CJ, I'm going to teach you something today. I'm going to teach you something today very interesting. You may or may not know. You may or may not know. Science is philosophy. Science is applied philosophy. Before there was such a thing as science, there was natural philosophy. And Aristotle is widely considered to be the first philosopher. because he not only speculated about physics, but he speculated about biology, he speculated about weather, he speculated about the formation of land, he speculated on all sorts of scientific subjects, but these were all part and parcel of his broader metaphysical thinking. So, science, scientia, knowledge, Latin knowledge, is now is the modern offshoot of what was once called natural philosophy. That is something that if people knew that nowadays, science would be a little better, in my opinion. In my opinion, because science involves a lot of assumptions that philosophy is actively questioning. For instance, induction. David Hume challenged induction. Scientists use induction on a regular basis. You do 30,000 experiments and you find that, you know, every single time you observe a molecule of water reacting with a molecule of sodium, it combusts. Uh, I'll answer that question in a second. You ask that question. If every single time you see a molecule of sodium reacting with a molecule of water and it combusts, does that mean that in general, sodium and water combust? That's what science says. That's what induction says. But is induction valid? We're not sure. That's what philosophy asks. Because if you see something happen, X amount of times, something seems to happen. Every single time you observe it, it happens in a particular way. Is it reasonable to infer that it will always happen that way? Or might there be exceptions to it? And we don't know, because the only argument that you could make in the favor of induction is that every time we have used induction so far, induction has worked. But that is itself an inductive argument. Well, I personally believe in the validity of induction, CJ. I personally believe in the validity of induction. But the problem is, you can't demonstrate the validity of induction through purely scientific discourse. You have to go beyond scientific discourse into philosophical discourse in order to talk about that. So it says, I guess I mean, does science interest you as a whole, or do you have a particular interest in science? I mean, I'd say physics is pretty interesting to me. I like physics a lot. Um, and I also enjoy chemistry to a certain extent. There's this YouTuber called Nile Red, and I love watching Nile Red's videos. And he's actually extremely thorough. He explains all the details of the chemical reactions that he does in his lab. He does a lot of very interesting experiments. And I find that interesting, but probably most of all, I find physics interesting. And my uncle is actually a physicist at Stanford. And when I was in high school, I was actually sort of, debating whether or not I wanted to go into physics, or whether I wanted to go into journalism, or whether I wanted to go into this or that. But physics was definitely on the table for a long time. I find physics very interesting. What I find most interesting of all is the relationship, what some thinkers have called uh, the unreasonable reliability of mathematics in describing the structure of the universe. And that is something, of course, that the ancients realized as well, which I will be covering more in my video on Pythagoras. But physics is now, sort of just bearing that open in ways that we could never do before. Physics is showing us the incredible, unbelievable symmetries of the universe, and our mathematical language describes it perfectly. And this even has some scientists spooked. Like, scientists just don't get how this made-up language of math can describe reality. Well, maybe it's because it isn't made up. Maybe it's because math actually belies something fundamental about the nature of the universe, and maybe that nature isn't something that you can discover through pure physics, but it does apply to pure physics. Okay, I think Bracken said something. As for me, I've gotten INTJ before, but in reviewing myself through Dave's system, I'm probably an ENTP or INTP. Turns out I was peacocking slash projecting my strengths. Organized. Yeah, Bracken. The problem with MBTI tests is that it can be easy to accentuate part of yourself that you either want, you want to associate with, or that you're afraid, you project it because you're afraid to say you're better than you really are. So MBTI assessments in terms of the tests that one does can be inaccurate. That's why I find self-assessment to be a lot more accurate for myself, as long as I know what does the I and the E stand for, what does the E and what does the N and the F stand for, sorry, not the N and the F, the N and the, what's the other thing, N and F, S, N and S, F and T, and J and P. As long as I know what they are, I always know I'm an INTJ because I'm introverted, I'm intuitive, I'm a thinker, I'm not a feeler, and I'm a judger, not a perceiver. So, you know, for me, that's the easiest way to sort of overcome those internal biases I might have when I'm answering silly questions like, "Are you the life of a party?" or whatnot. I'm like, I don't know if I'm the life of a party. Maybe sometimes I am. Maybe sometimes I'm not. I don't know. CJ says Galileo once said that if he could restart his education, he would take the advice of Plato and begin with the mastery of mathematics. And as someone who is taking tri-sci, I couldn't sympathize with him more. CJ, what is tri-sci? I'm very curious. I don't know what that is. Tri-sci. That's very interesting. I don't know what that is. Galileo said that if he could restart his education, he would advise Plato and begin with the mastery of mathematics. Yeah, you know what? I mean, I feel like Galileo was, a mathematical genius for his time. So, it almost sounds to me kind of like a regret that bore fruit because he ended up being quite a master of mathematics. The only physics, chemistry, and bio. Okay, cool. CJ, are you in high school or are you in college? I'm just curious whether that's a program that you're doing at your primary education, or whether that's something that you're doing for a major or something. It is really interesting, the way that these different branches are connected to each other. I remember reading the biography of Steve Wozniak was very interesting to me. It's called iJobs. Something that always struck me about no, it was called iWoz, IWOZ. Something that always struck me about this biography is the way that Wozniak's father taught him physics from scratch. Began with the electrons, moved on to the atoms, moved on to molecules, moved on to chemicals, moved on to chemical reactions. And this was the foundation of Wozniak's technological experience, which is why he ended up becoming the engineer that he was, and was able to, change the world through the development of technology. So let's see, what did you say? Last year of high school, only year two, funnily enough. CJ, I must object. Funnily is not a word. Funnily is not a word, but that's okay. I get what you're saying. Last year of high school, only year two. So, what are you planning to do in college? Now I'm very curious about that, because that was one of my main ambitions in this stream, was to talk about just my experience in college, and anyone who's interested in, what they might do in college. So, I mean, I'm assuming you're going into a scientific field, CJ, but I don't think that college offers tri-sci, right? I don't think you can do physics, chemistry, and biology all together, right? So, if you have a major in line, I'm assuming that it's one of those three or a spin-off of them. Well, I gotta say, I may be biased, but I definitely think that because, CJ said that he's considering going into philosophy and classics. I have to say, I feel like we have enough scientists and I feel like we have enough engineers. And I say this as someone who spent a lot of time in engineering and was quite good at it too, by the way. I wasn't bad at it. I didn't leave because I was bad at it. I left because I got tired of it, and because there were so many students in engineering. There were so many. And I heard a conspiracy from my English professor, which I kind of sort of believe in, but don't believe anything English teachers tell you. They're like, they're the English teachers are like the quack doctors of the modern world. But sometimes they might have insights. He said he thought the push for public education, on PBS, in the form of Bill Nye the Science Guy, Magic School Bus, all these shows in the 1990s that pushed science education and engineering education were actually a conspiracy by engineering companies to boost the number of engineers, to reduce the competition so that they would have to spend less money. Not endorsing this, not saying it's true, but I kind of sort of feel like deep down it's true because I live really close to Oak Ridge. Oak Ridge is where the atomic bomb was developed in World War II, and it's where the world's second most powerful supercomputer is housed now. A lot of my friends work there. And there's just so many more of them now than there were, 5 or 6 or 7 years ago. There's so many more of them as millennials grew up and sort of took these jobs. I think there might be some truth to it because they don't have to be paid as much. So let's see. CJ says, I know what you mean. In my country, all the immigrant students go into engineering. They are damn good at it, but it has kind of become their thing. So us students refrain from taking it ourselves. Well, let me say this. I can't say objectively for 100% certain that there are too many engineering students. I can't say that for sure. I kind of feel it deep down, and it just from my experience, and you seem to kind of feel the same thing. But I can say this, and I can say this for an objective fact. There are not enough philosophy students. There aren't enough. So if you really are interested in this, if it's something that you'd really like to do, and it's something you feel you have the passion to pursue, please do it. Please do it because we need more. We need more. I don't think there's ever been a time. I mean, I may be too grandiose. I may bloviate too much, but I feel there really has never been a time in history when studying philosophy has been more important. Because at no time in history was the primacy and the importance of philosophy challenged like it is now. Um, you know, the problem today is that we have these non-intersecting spheres of discourse that don't pay any attention to each other and they don't recognize anything higher than themselves. Sociologists don't think there's anything higher than sociology. And they write their sociology papers, they use their obscurantist sociology language. English teachers do the same thing. And psychologists do the same thing and scientists do the same thing, but none of them are talking to each other, and so none of them can learn from each other. The problem is they lost the field that had unified them once, and that field was philosophy. So, you know, I'm probably biased because I graduated in philosophy and I love philosophy, but I really think it's extremely important. It's extremely important to have good, dedicated philosophy students nowadays. So if that's something you really want to do, do it. Yeah, and I wish you the best. Let's see. Let's bring La Escuela de Atene back, boys. Gosh, I'm afraid I don't know what that is. La Escuela de Atene back. What is that? Don't know what that is. Yeah, I can't even guess what that is. I don't know what that is. That just sounds like gibberish to me. So, have to say, I didn't think this was going to be as successful at all. I thought that I was just going to be rambling at my microphone all day. And today was sort of a day where I just felt like I needed to ramble. Some days I feel like that. And so I thought, you know what? I might as well just ramble out of camera. So I'm glad that a few people showed up. And I think CJ, I think you commented on a video. The last video I posted, I think you commented on it a year ago. So you have been a faithful subscriber, which I really appreciate. So I promise I'm not going to let you down. I'm going to be uploading more videos. And I've thought about, I think that the 5-minute format, and you guys can give me feedback on this. The 5-minute format for individual philosophers is going to be extremely restrictive once I reach Socrates and Plato, it's gonna be. I don't think I can do it. I don't think I can make a 5 minute videos on. I'm not willing to make a 5 minute videos on Socrates or Plato, but that's been sort of looming over my head. So my thought is maybe I can make 4 or 5 separate 5 minute videos on Socrates or Plato. Yes, CJ, Pythagoras is coming up next. Before the end of August, okay? I promise you before the end of August. So the script has been written. I'm working on the video. And I have some great music, which I don't think many people think about the music. I do, but it's going to be good. So Pythagoras is coming up next. But I'm kind of right now, I'm just kind of thinking about the direction of my channel after I'm done with the minor philosophers. Because actually, the pre-Socratics are not too hard to make videos about. It's hard, like I said, it's hard to edit these videos. These videos are difficult to edit. I wish I had a more powerful computer. That would probably make my job easier. That probably make the workflow easier. But the hardest thing is going to be to make 5 minute videos about the Socratic philosophers. Making videos about Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle in 5 minutes is just going to be a nightmare. But I don't think I can do it. I don't think I can make videos on them in 5 minutes. I just think it'd be a sin, to like whittle them down to 5 minutes. There's just no way it can be done. I'm really tired of how many videos water down those philosophers in particular. So I'm thinking maybe 3 parters, 4 parters, because the fact that the pre-Socratics have little concrete info on them make researcher talking about it frustrating me to enjoy the challenge. Do you know, honestly, the thing is, it depends on how much credibility you give to the philosophers who talked about the pre-Socratics. Because if we just went off of, say, let's see, if we went off of Aristotle, okay, if we went off of the Stoics, okay, particularly, there's one in particular I'm thinking about. Never mind his name. His name eludes me. I cited him in my last video. I told you I'm bad with names. And we just went off these ancient sources. We'd actually have quite a lot of info about the pre-Socratics. The reason why people say we don't have much info about this pre-Socratics is because, textual historical researchers just they don't like what they call antagonistic sources. And they think of Aristotle as an antagonistic source. They think there's no way Aristotle is representing Anaximenes correctly because he disagrees with him. Therefore, he cannot possibly be representing him correctly. To me, that's kind of begging the question. God, I don't know if I agree with that at all. Like, I think there's a possibility that Aristotle disagrees with Anaximenes without misrepresenting him, right? Like, it just kind of begs the question. Like, if it's almost like these modern historians are saying, if Aristotle could possibly disagree with him, then he must be misrepresenting him. So Anaximenes must have been a super smart guy. Like, maybe not. Maybe he was kind of an idiot. I mean, it's possible. You don't know. But the actual fragments we have are very small. I do enjoy that, and that's what I want. What I don't want to do is I don't want to just say what Aristotle said about him. I don't want to say that. I do want to represent the research as far as the research is concerned. And like you say, there is the problem. We don't have we have none. We have none for Thales. We have none for Anaximenes. We have one fragment for Anaximander, and then we have a few dubious quotations from later authors. Later on, it becomes a little easier. Pythagoras is a big, tough cookie, and the reason that Pythagoras is a tough cookie is that he didn't write anything, and his school was well known even in ancient times to not represent him very well. But we know most of what we know from school. But in general, do I find it fun? Yes, I do. Yes, I do. I do find it fun, but mostly, I just find it fun, especially in a 5 minute video, to sort of give the middle finger to people who totally distrust ancient sources on these guys, because that just seems to me unfair. And I still, to this day, I think that's unfair. postmodern scholarship is all about challenging the status quo. But I think that in some cases that's unjustified. It's sort of this whole idea of Chesterton's fence. If you see a fence, don't tear it down until you know why it's there. And in philosophical research on ancient philosophers, so many times philosophers are just obsessed with tearing down philosophers just because they're there. Not because they know why they're there or why they said what they said, just because they can. They just assume there must be an agenda. It's like, I'm sure Aristotle had an agenda. At the same time, what he actually did say does corroborate what we have in the form of the loose fragments from these pre-Socratic philosophers. So probably he's fairly accurate when he portrays the pre-Socratics. So anyways, that's my answer to that question. Well, earlier I said that I was going to wait until 1:30. Now it is 1:52. So I'm going to wait till 2. I'm going to wait till 2. As long as questions keep coming out, I'm going to wait till 2. Yes, ask your off-topic questions, CJ. We've gone off topic several times today, so I think it's fine to go off topic. And hello, anyone new who's listening. Please feel free to chime in. I'm happy to answer any questions you have about the field of philosophy, particular philosophers, my opinions on philosophy, and whether or not you should pursue it. CJ asks, would you say that philosophy... Absolutely. Okay. CJ asks, would you say that philosophy helps in pursuing a career in law? I know for a fact that it does. What we did at UT, the department would take surveys of the grades that students would get in after philosophy majors versus all the other majors in the college. Not just the grades that they got, say for instance on assignments like papers or in analytical logic classes, which are considerably harder than just writing papers, depending on your proclivities as a student. But they would also rank their ability to take exams specifically tailored to determine somebody's suitability to various professions. Philosophy students at UT consistently ranked higher than anybody else in suitability for fields like law, like medicine, like engineering, just pretty much anything. Because the truth is, what one excels at, if one excels at philosophy, is thinking. And all these fields benefit from creative thinking. That includes law. It wasn't just UT, though. This is consistent across the board. Most people, in fact, I learned this specifically, and I wasn't personally interested in going into law, but the professors made sure to direct us to citations to convince us of this fact, and I was thoroughly convinced. Most colleges consistently demonstrate that philosophy students are better prepared to take the bar exam than anybody else. They can answer, they just learn to see past the little tricks, right, that arise in a court scenario and that are therefore reflected on the bar exams. So yeah, definitely, if you are interested in pursuing a career in law, philosophy would be a great undergraduate degree, and you could go on and get, your doctorate of law. That would be a very smart move, in my opinion. In fact, I think it would be this. In fact, I would go so far as to say it would be the smartest opinion. The best thing for you to major in college, if you want to go on to law school to become a lawyer or whatever you want to become, would be philosophy. And I feel that the statistics are on my side there. So, but at the same time, in my opinion, a somewhat tedious occupation. As much as I enjoy true crime, and as much as I enjoy, lawyer shows, a very tedious occupation. And I've read as much from real lawyers and such. But you do you, and if that's what you feel called to do, um, for sure. And it's very lucrative, of course. And it's also, it has a lot of societal historical significance. You can do a lot of good as a lawyer, hopefully. So that's what we all want to do, right? We all want to do some good for the world. So not always sure what good I'm doing for the world. So sometimes I think maybe I should go back to school and figure out something a little bit more humanitarian than what I'm doing now. Because right now I assist companies. I develop companies through writing, for instance, case studies or blog posts or that sort of thing. I'm a writer. I get paid to write. So it doesn't always feel like the most, doesn't always feel like I'm helping the world. But my grandfather always said, don't pursue art as a career. Always pursue art on the side, or your art will be corrupted by money. So always have a way to make money and then make your art until you can make money from your art without worrying about making art to please other people. So I never forgot that. And so that's kind of the justification that I use sometimes to make myself feel better about what I'm doing. So 2 minutes left. I promise I'm going to go offline at 2:00. So 2 minutes left. And if anyone wants to ask anything more, you can. If you don't have anything more to ask, you can just say goodnight and log off. But I will be here for 2 more minutes, and then I'm going to go offline. So I want to thank everyone who participated for participating, because this was actually pretty fun. Yeah, thank you, CJ. CJ, I don't have a Discord right now, and I'm going to wait on setting one up. I'm going to wait to actually publish a few more videos, because my subscriber base, I assume, has gotten a little bit stagnant. And Discord would be pretty fun, and so that's one of the reasons I'd like to revitalize this channel. I'm gonna publish that, Pythagoras video, and I'm gonna publish another one. I'm gonna try to get on a regular video publishing schedule here. Once I have 2 or 3 more videos published and the subscribers come in, because they've been coming in like crazy. I don't even know where I'm getting all these subscribers from. I think people are showing my videos at schools. I think they are, because when I look at my analytics, it says they're coming from, .edu addresses and stuff. So I think that's where my subscribers are coming from. So, I have about 800 subscribers right now. Once I get 1,000, I'll set up a Discord server. That's what I'll do. That's my deal. Once I have 1,000 subscribers, I'll set up a Discord server. So, yeah. And good luck to you, my dude, with college and high school and stuff. 5 years ago, I graduated. 5 years ago. Seems like forever, and it seems like yesterday. But college was a great experience. And honestly, I think that no matter what you choose, you're going to learn something. And, it is what you make of it. So enter it with an optimistic attitude. Be willing to learn, no matter what you enter. And just dedicate yourself to whatever you choose. Don't let yourself suffer doubts. Whatever you choose, stick with it. Because the worst thing that you can do is to be mediocre at something you should do. The best thing, better than that, is to be really good at something that isn't necessarily the best for you. So, anyways, that's my 2 cents. Everyone's gone except for you, CJ. CJ, thanks for sticking around. I appreciate it, man. Again, Pythagoras video will be coming out soon. I appreciate you participating tonight. So hopefully we can do this again soon. But I'm gonna go hit the hay. So I'll see you later, man. Farewell.